This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
Telling stories to teach supernatural, spiritual truth. Straight ahead on A View from the Bunker. Space is not the final frontier, but there are those who want you to think it is. 75 years ago, something crashed in the desert near Roswell, New Mexico. An industry has grown up to sell the idea that the pilots were extraterrestrials. We want you to know the truth. For a limited time, we're making available a special offer featuring the groundbreaking book, The Day the Earth Stands Still. This book shows step by step how the occult teachings of Madame Blavatsky and Aleister Crowley grew into the ancient aliens hypothesis of the modern UFO movement. It's our Gilbert House Roswell special. For just $35, we'll send you The Day the Earth Stands Still, plus our DVD sets, The Best of Sci-Friday Volumes 1 and 2. It's a $65 value for just $35. Take advantage of the Gilbert House Roswell special for a limited time only, and you'll only find it at our store, online at gilberthouse.org. Jesus used storytelling in the form of parables to teach spiritual truths. And certainly the enemy, the fallen realm, has used storytelling to great effect, from the Da Vinci Code to 2001: A Space Odyssey, E.T., Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind, basically anything coming out of Hollywood that deals with the supernatural, teaching a false, a wrong cosmology. So why do we as Christians not do more with storytelling? Joining me today are a pair of brothers who are trying to do just that. They were gracious enough to have me on their podcast not long ago, the Goslings, so-called Goslings with two S's. You'll see why in just a moment. I love the tagline for their podcast, Interviews That Strike Down the Darkness. They're the sons of gospel music Hall of Famer Larry Goss. Nick started his writing career in 2018 when his kids got old enough that he needed to use epic levels of creativity to keep them entertained. And now that has led to a series of books called The Travelers League. Book 1, The Timepiece, and his brother Jonathan, who raised in a home with strong theological background, a lot of church mixed background, his upbringing with a love for fantastical storytelling and medieval warfare. And that has turned into the 6 books of the Heavenly Realms series. 6 novels so far, beginning with Empyrean Falling, which I've just begun to read. And we welcome to the program for the first time Nick and Jonathan Goss. Nick, Jonathan, welcome to the bunker.
Hey, Derek. Thanks for having us.
Hey, thank you.
At least I could do. Not least, I mean, you guys were gracious enough to have me on your program, but seeing that you guys are prolific writers of fiction from a Christian worldview, we need to stick together and talk this up a little bit more.
Yeah.
We'll get into what inspires you and how you all got started on this, but I just want to get your sense of where Christian fiction is today, because the last real close dealings that Sharon and I had with it was back in 2002, 2003, as we were starting to write a series, the two of us together, where we were writing in the same fictional universe, writing independently of each other, but sharing plot points and sharing characters.
Oh, that's cool.
And now here we are in 2022. 20 years later, we're actually coming back to that idea, and we're going to actually work her Red Wing saga into this series that started back in 2002 with her novel Winds of Evil. But cool. We found this. We attended the Christian Bookseller Association convention in Atlanta, and then she attended a second one in Nashville. I was tied up doing something else. And our sense was that Christian fiction was mainly stories about Amish women.
Yeah.
Have things changed? I mean, we've essentially published our own stuff now since then, since about 2007. So I've not really paid that much attention, quite honestly. There's not much in the way of Christian fiction that I found all that interesting. What is it like these days?
Well, I'll, if you don't mind me jumping in
go
here.
for it.
Yeah, no, it's funny you say Amish women, because when I've gone to the homeschool conference, because I'm a homeschool dad, teach them diligently. And they have an enormous section downstairs where there are, hundreds of booths. And most of the people represented at those conferences are people of faith. They're Christians for the most part. And a lot of these booths are selling Christian fiction. And the reason that it's so frustrating finding anything written recently that's Christian fiction, and it all kind of falls into that. It's always like the Amish women or the frontier woman, or it's just Bible stories, repackaged Bible stories for kids. And it
Samson and Delilah with the football player and the cheerleader.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, but I mean, if they even get that creative with it, it's. I think what's happened is that at least in middle grade, at least in the genre that I write in, there has been this enormous infusion of secular values and leftist values that are infiltrating middle grade fiction, and it's been infiltrating young adult, the next age group up, for a long, long time. So there's nothing wholesome out there that parents can trust that's secular, and when they see something that looks and smells or they might suspect is kind of secular, that doesn't neatly fit these, check all the boxes of what they have in their mind as Christian fiction, they kind of avoid it. So I think a lot of Christian authors are, trying to sell low-hanging fruit, something that looks and smells and seems wholesome. They want something wholesome for their kids. So if it's not something like, if it's not the, pioneer women or Amish women, it's something that was written, the C.S. Lewis's, the Tolkien's, stories written in the 19th century that are wholesome. So they're kind of like falling on these
Pilgrim's Progress.
Yeah, and the other thing, and this is what drives me nuts, is that they're afraid to write. There's nothing that's like creative as far as fantasy goes. They don't want to jump into fantasy because they're afraid that they're going to create some universe that might cross the boundaries of what people understand the spiritual world to be in reality. They're afraid to, entertain the idea that, there could be multiple deities in a story because it might confuse the reader. Well, there's only one God. Yeah, but this is fiction.
Right.
Yeah. And that they don't want to tell something that's not completely in line with, what they believe about the Bible.
That's a one-to-one translation.
Right. And so it's hard for you to say, it's fiction. And it's a fictional story, but everything has to doctrinally align with Scripture. They can't stray from that.
So the timepiece is out because of the Minotaur, basically.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, my book. Yeah.
So super fun.
Yeah. So in all my books, I have those
which is too bad. I just started reading the timepiece and Empyrean Falling, by the way, and looking forward to getting deeper into those. But the Minotaur is something that Sharon has actually worked into one of her Red Wing Saga novels.
Very cool.
Awesome. Yeah.
But when you look back at ancient Mesopotamian iconography, the artwork that depicts their gods and supernatural characters, and the bullmen, the kusariku, were a common theme. And when you look at the cherubim or cherubim, the Hebrews pronounce it, or the Israelis pronounce it that way. It's pretty clear from Ezekiel chapter 10, Ezekiel 1 and 10, when you compare the descriptions of the cherubim, that there is a definite bovid appearance to those things. So I don't see why the Minotaur would be that far out of bounds.
And wouldn't I believe in Revelation, I think it's Revelation or Daniel, I can't remember which one, but it describes one of the four spirits around the throne has the appearance of a bull as well. And that's, one of the four one of the throne guardians.
Oh, yeah.
Has that appearance, if I'm not mistaken. And it seems like a lot of the Baal worship, too, not just Baal worship, but ancient pagan worship from the region, the idols were always bulls.
Jeroboam, the golden calf, right. I mean, the chief god of Canaan, his main epithet was Bull El. And scholars have dug deeper and found that the probable origin of the name Titan for the old gods of the Greeks who were banished to Tartarus is the name of an ancient Amorite tribe called the Tidanu, who were so frightening to the ancient Sumerians. The last Sumerian kings of Mesopotamia, the third dynasty of Ur, built a wall 175 miles long to try to make Sumer great again and keep the Tidanu out. And it didn't work, obviously, because the kingdom fell around the time that Abraham was born. But that word, Tidanu, comes from the Akkadian word for bison or aurochs or bull.
Wow.
Really?
So there's a very old, if Kronos, in fact, comes from the Semitic word karen or karnu, that means horns, the horned one. So there's a very old imagery, some very old imagery there. But when, and when you start digging into the Bible, I mean, that's a thing that most of us have not been taught in churches, angelology. I mean, the seraphim, the cherubim, the wheels within wheels, the ophanim, the malachim. You dive into this a lot in your Heavenly Realm series, Jonathan, the nature of the angelic realm. How inspired were you by the depictions of the Bible, and how far did you have to go outside of the Bible to kind of inform your description of those supernatural characters?
I took a very, this always disappoints people. I took a very anthropomorphic approach because I had a friend, or I have a friend, who did that with a movie script version of what he was, of the same kind of story. And I found it to be sort of like what Matt Stone and Trey Parker have depicted in the past, or what they say is like, you don't want a hat on top of a hat. You can wear a hat, but then if you put a hat on a hat, it's weird. One hat's cool, two hats is weird. And like, I was trying to tell this very intense cosmic drama, of the fall of Lucifer, and in these books, it's sort of simplified the transformation into Satan, and the leading of the 1/3 into a rebellion. And I wanted to do that at first. I had this idea of having all these mythological creatures, like my friend who was writing the movie script. Well, I shouldn't say mythological, but biblically fantastical, creatures. And then I realized, like, for me at least, maybe it's my limitation as a writer, like, I couldn't make that work. Maybe I'm not creative enough, but like, I couldn't make that work from a dramatic sense. So what I ended up doing was crafting a very fictionalized narrative, which is sort of explained in the author's note in the beginning, that like, look, this is a fictional interpretation. This is not meant to supersede anything in the Bible, but I basically dressed them up in human garb so that it would become more accessible. Now there are monsters in the Heavenly Realm series. One of them, actually, coincidentally, is kind of a bull god of sorts, Mazarel. He is my creation from whole cloth. He's like my version of, like, I wanted a bad guy who could be Satan's right-hand man, who could do all the terrible things that I can't really have Satan do, because he's still he's embodying Lucifer, and he's trying to be like this, magnanimous, savior type, but you still need a bad guy who can just like be vicious, the scourge of the faithful. So I created this character Mazarel, who ends up looking like a minotaur in a lot of ways. He's like if you mix Hellboy with Satan from South Park, and and like a minotaur all into one, So it's funny how, like, even when you try to diverge from that and create something that's going to be more accessible, and a lot of people really liked the fact that the angels they look like us, in the Heavenly Realm series. A lot of people also did not. They were disappointed by it, but it's like, even in your attempt to anthropomorphize and make this as accessible as possible, you still end up coming right back around to like the thing that you avoided, and doing the very thing that you avoided in the first place. And it worked out beautifully. But it was like, if I did too many of those, for me, I felt like I probably would have failed at it for my own writing ability, especially at the time, because I started these when I was 17. So I was ironically
been writing a long time.
I was at Lighthouse. I went to Lighthouse Christian, a little Baptist, prep school in Antioch, Tennessee, and I was sitting there in chapel class junior year, ignoring the sermon that the principal was preaching, and just started writing that first scene, chapter 1, in the beginning of Empyrean Falling, when Lucifer is talking to the seraph Maldus, and it just sort of blossomed out from there. So I think if I had done it later, especially after reading your stuff and Gary Wayne's stuff, I probably would have been more adventurous. I probably would have like had the chops to make it weirder. You know what I mean?
Sharon and I were just talking about that this afternoon because I've gone back and I've started rereading some of her older stuff and my older stuff. The God Conspiracy we republished last year because it dealt with the experimental medical procedure that was recommended, and those who denied or decided not. Yeah, there were camps involved and all sorts of other things. It suddenly became a lot more relevant than it had been back in 2005. But I had to change some of the theology because of things that have changed since then, the things that I've learned since then. Yeah. And Sharon said, the same thing is true with the earlier novels like Winds of Evil and Signs and Wonders, which we're probably going to republish by the end of this year. But it is interesting when you're trying to reach for that and teach and not really understanding the theology behind it. What's really interesting, and Nick, I'm curious about this, especially since you're writing for a younger audience. Do you find is what Jonathan said to be true for you as well? Like, how is your better understanding of theology affected your ability to create characters and write this fantastic fiction for younger readers?
Well, that's a good question. When the series first started, it was really just a story that my son and I were making up together. He wanted me, he was 8 years old at the time. I read to him every night at bedtime. And one night he wanted a break from the routine and asked if we could just make up something together. And so I just started making up something. I thought of a magic timepiece. There's this boy. I let him name the character. And when he sets the timepiece to 1 o'clock, it magically takes him to this fantasy world. And by the end of us doing that for 2 hours, I said, okay, that's the end of the 1 o'clock world. I'm tired. We're going to do 2 o'clock tomorrow night. No, I want to do 2 o'clock. No, we're going to do 2 o'clock tomorrow night. So the next night, we made up a 2 o'clock world and so forth. So it went on for about 2 weeks. And every night he was just so interested in what was going to happen next, what the next world would be, that my wife said, hey, you should really think about maybe self-publishing this, like turn it into a book for other kids to enjoy. So I did, made some slight edits here to the plot, here and there. But really, I wasn't trying to tell a story. I wasn't trying to set up something that would have an altar call at the end. That's not the intention of the book. I was desperate for something that was, a fantasy. It was engaging. It gave kids an adventure, and it had values that parents could trust their kids to expose their kids to. Loyalty to friends, being brave, realizing you can't be brave if there's no fear. Just good themes, strong thing, doing the right thing no matter what. Yeah. As you'll see at the end of the book, the main character has a really, really hard decision to make.
Yeah, it's awesome.
He can either make a decision that he knows deep, deep, deep down is the right thing to do, or he can make the alternate decision against his conscience and be a part of this group of child heroes, these friends that he's been dying to have in his life, and he finally finds his tribe, so to speak. So he's got to make a really, really hard choice. And then so it's those themes that I want kids to read and be exposed to and have a great story that they can get lost in a fantasy world. It's funny because when I read the Chronicles of Narnia, like so many people did, as a kid, I was unaware of the theology until, the stone table cracked and Aslan came back from the grave. I was like, oh, I recognize this. Oh, so that's what's going on. But up to that point in the first book, I was just like, man, this is an amazing fantasy story, and which is why I love Lord of the Rings so much. You have to really, really try hard and do some gymnastics to extract gospel messaging from the Lord of the Rings.
But there's still logos there.
That's right. There's the themes of it's logos driven, 100%. But it's a beautiful, wonderfully spun story, and you're always rooting for those who are true, those who are brave, those who are just trying to save their friends,
right?
And I wanted that. I wanted a piece of that in my book. So I wasn't looking for an altar call per se. Unlike my first and only so far venture into young adult writing. I wrote a paranormal urban fantasy for young adults called Henry Half Moon, and it's a mix of Greek gods. There's Christianity in there. There is the Anunnaki. Even the Babylon working is mentioned. So I'm throwing all of these really weird things in there.
It's right up your alley, Derek.
And he's
you would really like it. Yeah.
Yeah. And when you read it, you're going to be like, oh no, this isn't how things work. This is not what that meant. Yeah. But I'm taking elements and I'm creating this fantasy, this story. But in that one, it was very evident at the end that the real God, the true God behind everything that was going on was Christ. This was Jesus that was in control of this. Jesus is the one that essentially called Henry to basically be a demon slayer in the other realm. Yeah. And kind of a Grim Reaper type, only his job is to slay, gargoyle-esque demons
from the abyss.
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah. But even Henry doesn't know that. He doesn't want to believe. He's cynical.
Yeah.
His parents were trying to raise him that way. He doesn't believe all that. He knows there's just more out there.
Typical college
Who knows what the real truth is, but there's something more there than what people will believe. And then he goes on this fantastic journey, and only at the end.
Which is a cool spiritual journey.
Yeah, only at the end is he like, now I get it.
Yeah.
Now I get it.
Yeah. Now, mom and dad are right.
Yeah. So in a way,
right about Jesus, and I've just been a jerk this whole time.
In a way, and this is highly, this is not theologically accurate, but in a way, there is kind of an altar call. But imagine an altar call after you die, which is like nobody's gonna be like, that's not how it is. But I'm not trying to write a theologically accurate story. I'm not trying to fit this into a theological framework. I'm trying to tell a great story, and in that case, that points people to directly to Christ at the end.
And that's the thing. If you can point people to the Bible, if you can point people to Christianity, to Jesus, then and as long as you're not directly trying to interpose fictional elements onto what the Bible says, you can create something that deals in the spaces of silence, where, it's not really talked about a whole lot, or it's super interpretive. Like what Nick deals with is kind of some of the stuff in Revelations with Henry Half Moon. And then what I deal with, is like the visions that people have seen of these angels. It's like, well, are you a literalist, or is this interpretive, or, is this metaphorical somehow? And it's in those like gray areas that I think you can sort of get away with crafting your own story that you're capable of telling that still gives the message without violating anything. And because that's super important. You don't want to stand in violation of whatever the Bible says, because that defeats the whole point. The whole point is to make people say, wow, Henry Half Moon's journey is kind of like, my journey in a not so literal way,
Well, Henry Half Moon and the Travelers League series for the middle grade, there were the stories that, I wanted to read. They were the type of story that I wanted to read, that I thought was lacking out there. Something that was willing to, violate the established rules of what Christian fiction is supposed to be, and violate it without offense in a way. Like just not try to follow the norm. I want that fantasy. I want that fun fantasy. I want that fun paranormal element to the story. Without people feeling like they're reading something that's going to be a danger or detriment to their faith, or their children's faith in any way, and it's not.
No.
What kind of feedback have you gotten on the creative aspects of your writing? And I ask this because one of the reasons we began investigating self-publication back as early as 2005 was because the publisher, who was a traditional Christian publishing house dipping its toes into the water of fiction back around that time. They had published Sharon's first novel, Winds of Evil. The second novel was getting close. They'd also, had they done the Armageddon Strain? I think they had. And they were editing my first novel, The God Conspiracy. And they were just getting really kind of squeamish. You guys have crop circles and UFOs in here, and government conspiracies, which we learned were much more popular during the Clinton years among Christian publishers than during the George W. Bush years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we just said, okay, fine. We'll just, say thanks. It's been a good experience. We'll move on. For the most part, people have been very positive about the storylines and the theology that's in there. Admittedly, not perfect theology, but what kind of response have you gotten from the creative aspects? Are there what kind of pushback? What kind of encouragement?
Well, do you want to go or?
Sure. Yeah.
We'll take you go first, and then I'll go.
Mine was so I first attempted to get published in 2005. And then I attempted again in 2008, kept writing during that time. But 2005 was when I finished the first draft of Empyrean Falling, which was a nightmarish 1,147-page brick. So no wonder. But both times that I was rejected by pretty much every publishing company, it was like, the secular publishers won't touch anything that's overtly Christian, and my stuff has always been overtly Christian. The Christian publishers didn't want to touch anything that I had written because it was too violent. Because these are right. It's like Gladiator. I mean, they got swords, they got shields. They like those things do things, and they didn't like it because. Lucifer, trying to remember how they put it. Lucifer was problematic to certain Christian publishers because he had teeth in his arguments. He's ultimately wrong, and it boils down to the theme of the book of the first book, which is replace fear with faith. Lucifer / Satan operates out of fear and pride, and Michael operates out of faith and humility, and because of that Michael's the good guy, and anyways, but they didn't like it because it wasn't that feel good kind of warm and fuzzy sort of Amish lady in the countryside fiction that we were talking about. It's it kind of was its own sort of animal. So and they just didn't think it was very marketable. And in a way, when you look at sales, they were kind of right. It is very niche, you know. I've had a lot of great feedback and experiences from a lot of men, which makes sense because I wrote the whole 7-novel series from the time I was 17 to the time I was 26 or 28. 27-ish.
Over a decade. I mean, it's a huge body of work.
Yeah, and I took time off. I actually owe my ability to publish on Amazon to Nick because I had given up, and then Nick published in 2018. Is that right?
Yep.
The year Mom died, and I saw him do it, and how it was back in the day, Derek. Like self-publishing was just an expensive vanity project.
Right. Yeah.
There was, what I mean? Like if you couldn't get published through a traditional publisher back in all the way up to probably the late 2000s, maybe early 2010s, you were sunk. It was either that or you're like the crazy person at the UFO expo with the pamphlet of, moon documents in a binder, So it just, I had given up basically. And but I realized that those books, my niece told me she got into the first one. She was like, "Oh, this is a boy book." I'm like, "Yes, of course it's a boy book. It's about warrior angels, fighting each other and like they're all dudes, Yeah. So I've had a lot of good feedback from fighting age males, which is kind of who these books are written for, which is kind of a detriment because fighting age males are too busy working.
Saying there's no romance?
You know what? In Sherman Drain, there's romance.
Very good.
Because that's the one about the flood. So it's not great romance, but it's there, because it's angels and women. Yeah. But it is, there you go. It's still powerful. That my experience, my feedback was, like I said, I did have some people who were upset that the angels didn't look like their literal depictions in the Bible at certain times, that they were anthropomorphized. And then I had some people who couldn't connect with it because the target audience was me in a way, just like with Nick talking about, he wanted to write stuff that he wanted to read. I wanted the same thing. When I was 17, the reason why that whole thing got started with Heavenly Realms is I saw my friends and I snuck into a movie theater to watch Dogma, Kevin Smith's movie.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that scene where Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, who are the fallen angels, have that argument in the parking garage, and they're talking about war on God, was like a scene out of a whole other movie. And we were reading Paradise Lost at the time in English AP class, and so it's like those two ideas just sort of connected. Mm-hmm. So some people have really gravitated towards that, and then other people, you know, they just don't connect with it because it's so niche or it doesn't meet their expectations. But thankfully, I mean, I've had some people say this got them back into church. I've had some people say this got them back into reading, you know. I have had some really beautiful feedback from some people that really make it worth it. Mm-hmm. It's like, man, if you can get like one or two of those, you can put up with 1,000 slings and arrows.
Yeah.
It's totally cool. You know what I mean? Like, it's totally worth it.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I'll tell you the worst review I ever got for this middle grade, ages 8 to 12, this middle grade fantasy, was someone who said, worst young adult novel ever. The writing was very rudimentary. Like, yeah, it's for kids.
Right.
Yeah.
For children.
Yeah.
That's the point. But it was also the first thing that I ever
It's not
published.
Dostoevsky.
Yeah.
You know.
But that aside, I didn't when I wrote this, I didn't pursue traditional publishing. I knew from the outset that I wanted to just self-publish it. I wanted to self-publish it. I knew I could get it to, you know, I have a pretty big audience of homeschoolers in this area. It's a big we're part of that community. And I knew I'd have more control over things. And I never even entertained traditional publishing. I wanted to get it out there and not go through the years of rejections before I finally got it in shape for a traditional publisher to say yes to it. Yeah. And so I just went for it.
Yeah.
And got it out there, and it ended up being, I think, a very decent product. I think it was very good. And people who read it, the kids who read it, they all like it. When it first came out, I was so sensitive to, you know, the idea that a child might go, I didn't really like it, you know.
But you've never had that experience, have you?
No. The closest I ever got was we went to church, and there was this girl. She was about 9 years old, and she was one of the first handful of kids that read it. And she goes, oh, and she saw me at church. She's like, oh, hey, I read your book. I said, oh, really? Did you like it? She goes, yeah, you know, it actually wasn't that bad. I said, that's great. Awesome. Do me a favor. Don't leave me any reviews.
Yeah, right. You know how it is, like, Derek, when you give copies of your book to somebody.
Kids will say anything.
Oh, they'll say anything, and you want to tell them, like,
trying to sound grown up. You know,
here's a free copy. If you like it, leave a review. If you don't like it, keep your mouth shut.
Shut up.
Yeah.
But it was really cute. But a lot of kids really like it. I mean, I've gotten invitations to go to like local book clubs run by homeschoolers, you know, to come and talk about it. And I've had some good reviews with some other self-published authors. Yeah. And I think the response has been really good. The kids who read it really enjoy. I've never heard of a kid reading book one and not wanting to immediately read the next book. Yeah. So they really do get into the story.
Yeah.
A lot of the themes that we see depicted in the Bible. I'm thinking this morning, our Bible study, Sharon and I recorded an hour on 1 Samuel 13 and 14, which was Saul not waiting for Samuel and offering the sacrifice on his own, and Samuel showing up and saying, what have you done? Okay, because of this, you're going to lose the kingdom. And then following that, Jonathan, when the Philistines invaded and were overrunning, and the Hebrews were hiding in caves and in holes in the ground, and Jonathan and his armor bearer, two guys.
At the garrison.
Yeah. And they want to go up to the garrison. And they said, if they say, come on up, then that means God has delivered them into our hand. And the armor bearer's like, my heart is where your heart is. Yeah. My heart is with your heart. Do what your hand finds to do, or whatever the phrase. But, you know, thinking in my mind, okay, I've seen Israel. I've seen that area, lots of hills. The Philistines had the high ground, which is what you want when you're on defense, because the attacker is going to have to climb up. Plus, we just read that the Israelites didn't have any iron. They had to go to the Philistines to sharpen their plows and sickles. So they're going up there with inferior weapons, storming up the hill at an entrenched defensible position. And unlike his father, who's like hiding, and it's like, well, Samuel wasn't here, so I had to do the sacrifice to try to get God on my side. And Jonathan's like, God will take care of us. Either they'll come down to us and he'll take care of them, or they'll say, come up and we'll go. And you see that, and especially when you've got kids of your own, or you get to a certain age where you realize that Jonathan was maybe 20, young enough to be, almost young enough to be my grandson at this point, and think, what a remarkable story this is. Yeah. And we just sort of kind of gloss over it, you know?
Yeah, no one talks about that.
Yeah, what I love about that story, too, is that when Jonathan sees the garrison, he wants God to be on his side, and he says, let's go do it. Let's go up there, and perhaps God will deliver the Philistines to us.
Right.
Perhaps.
Right.
I'm going to take action, and we're going to test the Philistines to see, but maybe God will, maybe God won't. I'm going to go up there, and I'm going to leave it in his hands. And he was
that's faith.
That's not what Saul did.
Right.
No.
He tried to manipulate God.
Yes, that's the point. He thought God could be manipulated through sacrifice, through rite and ritual, and that's where that's why Samuel said, "No, the kingdom's going to be taken away from you."
Yeah.
But we see values like this depicted in the secular realm all the time. For example, in the fourth season of Stranger Things, which I don't recommend for family viewing, but you see the kids in the story kind of exemplifying that sort of sacrificial bravery. And the one character who sacrifices it all is the one who's based on Damien Eccles, one of the West Memphis Three.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
We've talked about him before.
He's the one who basically gives his last full measure in defense of the town that hated him. So Eccles' reputation is being whitewashed now through the secular media. But again, it's through their own actions. Unlike Jonathan, who was like, let's go, and maybe God will deliver them into our hands. We're just going to have faith in him that whatever comes about, it's his will.
Yeah.
And there's a good end. But most secular entertainment, the opposite is true. It's always the work of our hands. Even in the supernatural films like the Stephen King movies, it's never, let's pray for deliverance from our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. It's, hey, we've got some nitroglycerin and some TNT here. Let's blow up the demons.
Right. Well, it's all about that Luciferian, you are your own gods, you manifest your own destiny kind of thing. And that's the difference between prayer and witchcraft. Which the lines between prayer and witchcraft get very blurry, because people think that if they, just like the king, if they pray a certain way, or if they say a certain thing, or if they hold their tongue a certain way and face the harvest moon, if they say a certain litany, or if they recite a certain scripture or whatever, that it has some sort of ability to, or if they just sort of pray a certain thing, they can trick God, and when, the difference between prayer and witchcraft really is just, prayer is submitting yourself to the will of God so that you can be, deep in the current, or you can, pray a certain way to where you are trying to get God to bend to your will, and
which is where the prosperity gospel goes so wrong.
Oh my gosh, dude, no kidding.
Yep.
Yeah. So, but people can, people think witchcraft is all, burning things and curly knives over altars and black robes and stuff. It's like, no, man, witchcraft can look just like prayer. Mm-hmm. It can look just like prayer. It's like, how are you praying? Mm-hmm. Are you praying, like the king without Samuel, and making the sacrifice on your own out of fear? Or are you acting, like Jonathan, his son, and the armor bearer, and are you just acting out of faith and just leaving it up to God instead of trying to force God to do what you want?
That's the thing, because a good result, the win, the victory for the prayer, for the one who prays, all the credit goes to God.
Right.
In Jonathan's case, He said, perhaps God will give us the victory. Not perhaps we'll have the victory, and then we can decide how much credit we want to give God. If we lose, that's on us. Yeah. But if we win, that's on God.
Mm-hmm. That was something I tried to it repeatedly comes up in Empyrean Falling, especially because it's kind of the motif is that everything Lucifer does in Empyrean Falling is meant to solve his daddy issues with God, you know, and keep in mind, like, all this was written before Supernatural, before Lucifer, like, before all these things that, like, you know, because they told me there was no market for this stuff. And then I watched, like, over the next 10 years as, like, all these movies and shows came out. I was like,
right.
Oh, this sucks, you know, but that really is kind of the difference between the two characters that is very applicable to the human condition. You know, that, you know, Lucifer, in the story, Lucifer is the one who builds the white throne because God exists. Their father exists in the Empyrean, which is a higher level of heaven than what they are currently experiencing. They're in this lower realm, which is sort of this Middle Earth-esque, you know, analog for, you know, terrestrial environment, corporeal. It's very corporeal. And so there's this separation. So everything Lucifer does, from like crafting the Garden of Eden, you know, and being the cherub who walked upon the fiery stones, to building the white throne, to forming the Eastern Kingdom, you know, all this stuff that's laid out in Empyrean Falling, it's his attempt to, much like Jordan Peterson talks about in his Cain and Abel lecture, you know, Cain is making all of these erroneous sacrifices. They're sacrifices, but they're not the right ones. You know, and Michael is the one he has the faith, you know, whereas his older brother Lucifer, who also is a cherub, just has his fear and his pride. And Michael is the one who's over here, like, just saying, you know what, I'm just going to do what I think God wants me to do. And if I fail, then I fail. And I'll go back to the Empyrean and exist with God. And sure. Or if I win, then we can save humanity from my brother who has lost his marbles, you know? And and that plays out in a couple of different ways in Empyrean Falling, you know, especially in the one chapter where, like, Michael doesn't really know how to do that in a really great way at one point, and it nearly kills him. Yeah. So it's I mean, but he's not saved literally by the shadow of the Son of God.
Yeah, he's not rebellious, but he's
hot-headed.
He has he's super convicted,
passionate.
You know, but he's not perfect
and kind of dumb.
You know, and he's willing to stand his ground almost to the point of his own destruction.
Yeah.
You know, in the face of, you know, his betters telling him what he needs to do. Yeah, his heart's always in the right place.
He's very Davidic.
Yeah, so he's not a perfect good guy, which is what makes him interesting. And Lucifer is not a perfect bad guy.
Right.
You know, he's not just 100% all bad, no matter what. There's something of interest there.
Yeah.
That's, you know, tragic. Why the reason the traditional Christian publishers didn't like the book is what makes it interesting.
Right. Yeah.
You know.
Oh, thank you.
Because it allows you to have, you know, it allows you to experience that character in a way that actually makes the story enjoyable. He does not just, here's the pattern.
Right.
I don't want to read about patterns. I know the patterns.
Yeah, we know the story.
I know the tropes.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, that was the thing about Lucifer, that, like, when I was first writing the book, you know, I was 17. So, like, I was going through all the things that a teenager goes through in high school, you know, and a lot of Lucifer's arguments and struggles and grievances, as immature as they were mine at the time. And they kind of, at various points in your life, they continue to be. So it's like, you want to give voice to the stuff that people struggle with, you know? I was talking to Mark Chadwick, who is a composer friend of our family, and he's writing music for the audiobook, for the unabridged edition of the audiobook. We're going to do a score. And he told me last week, he was like, you know, I had all of these like big, grand, celestial, heavenly samples ready. And they're all beautiful. I've listened to them. And he said, you know, but I started reading Empyrean Falling, and through our emails and you telling me about the characters, I realized, like, I need to make the music more human, you know, because all of these characters' struggles, they're our struggles. They're every bit of them, you know, whether it's Gabriel, Michael, Lucifer, Mazarel, I mean, even the darkest of the dark deals with the same stuff that you and I deal with all the time throughout our lives, and you got to hear about that.
It's one of the things that I read about writing that has resonated with me, and I don't know that I've ever mastered this. Sharon is very good at it. Ben Bova, well-known science fiction writer, legendary science fiction author, wrote that each character in the plot has to believe that the story is about him, that he is the hero of the story. He may be just a secondary character, a walk-on, but even for that one page that he gets as a secondary or tertiary character, he's got to think that the story is all about him. Otherwise, he becomes a cardboard cutout that you just move across the screen and, moves off again and it affects the believability of the world, the depth of the world that you've created. But that means that when it comes to characters like Lucifer or the wizard Braxo, you've got to get inside the mind of the character and empathize with him to write his character as though he's really the hero. How difficult is it to get inside the mind of a villain, especially when you're getting inside the mind of really supernatural evil?
I'll tell you, I'm in the middle of writing a supplemental chapter in the last book right now. It's called Pandemonium Rising. So it's an inversion of Empyrean Falling. It's the last book in the series, and there's this chapter, this always happens, where Satan is talking to a prisoner that he's taken, a faithful prisoner. And the faithful prisoner is the first created angel. Not an archangel, but the first created angel. And it's ultimately leading towards like a conversion experience of sorts, where Satan gets convicted for the first time possibly ever, by the first angel preaching to him. But I always feel oily and gross after delving into these characters' psychologies, especially when it's like Mazarel and his rival Umbra Tempest, who are both fallen angels and they hate each other, or Satan and Asmodeus, or one of the other fallen. And man, you have to get into their psychology so you understand what their motivation is and what their flaws are and what flaws drive them, I guess. So like what's the critical thing with Asmodeus, or I always call him Asmodeus, but I'm mispronouncing it. What's the thing that, Asmodeus or Giad Althaziel or Mazarel or Umbra Tempest or any of these characters, who are fictionalized or not, what's their motivation? What is and what is that sin inside of them that motivates them the most, at least in this scene? And dude, sometimes like I just get bummed out. I just gotta go I gotta go outside and just like have a smoke and let the dog out and just go for a walk and just listen to some DC talk and just, I gotta just like decompress
and hope God does a new thing.
That's a deep DC talk pull, by the way. That's pre-Jesus freak. Good for him.
That is pre-Jesus freak right there, baby. I'm old school.
But yeah, you know how it is, Derek. You have to get inside of the minds of the characters, and man, sometimes that's a dark place, and Braxo's kind of like that.
Yeah, right? Yeah, Braxo's kind of like that too. Braxo, the villain of book one, is, you learn in later on in the series that he was a normal kid.
Yeah,
he was going through his own journey with the timepiece at one point.
Yeah,
he was betrayed by another kid, trapped in this particular world, and grew resentful and bitter.
Yeah,
and so his mission in life. Our camera died.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, I can.
We've still got we've got a still photo of you up there, but if you can reboot, that'd be great.
I can. All I need to do is swap out. This is a great edit point, by the way. So,
right.
When you see the tiki mug go up to Jonathan's lips, that's where you cut it.
The leaky one. Yeah.
Let me just switch the battery in the camera.
What's funny though is that it's that resentment. I mean, the resentment is the same thing that resentment's the same thing that got Lucifer, I think, in a lot of ways. And Nick sort of did a magician's nephew with that backstory. Am I right, Nick?
A little bit.
Yeah, it came out.
Yeah, because I did the Broken Legs of War, which explains the backstory of Braxo.
Yeah.
When he's a kid, he goes on that adventure where things go bad for him.
It's a good thing we're not doing this live, Derek.
So like a wizard equivalent of Gollum.
A wizard equivalent of Gollum. Yeah, in a lot of ways. There's pain, isolation. Pain creates isolation. Isolation opens you up to a ton of resentment. Because there's nothing there to
I'm sorry.
There's nothing there to like really. I got a stripper clip of 38 Special. Will that help? We could shoot the camera. Sure. But yeah, that resentment, man, it creeps in because there's nothing there to combat the negativity.
One of the things that Sharon and I thought was really insightful when we talked with Timothy Alberino last year about his book Birthright, which is about the rebellion between the angelic realm and God, those of the angelic realm that have fallen, is the parable of the prodigal son.
Yeah.
We are the prodigal son, the older brother who's resentful that they're going to throw a party that he's come back covered with pig mess. Are the loyal, faithful angels.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. In fact, that is a plot point of Pandemonium Rising. And and it's the whole. In fact, it's funny you mentioned that because there are 2 or 3 chapters where that first angel and Satan are conversing. They're having a dialectic, and the last chapter that they are together is actually called Prodigal, and it's that very same thing of, because in Empyrean Falling, the whole crux of what broke Lucifer's back mentally was the creation of humanity. Now you can theologically argue when in the timeline the fall happened. For me, for the sake of writing and telling a good story, I decided that the angels had helped God create Earth. They created Eden, and then Lucifer created the garden, and he was thinking that this would draw their father back because they had been separated from him. And instead of drawing father back, what Father and the Son did, who's Christ before he's named Christ for Jesus, is they created another version of themselves. And Lucifer was like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Like, we're being replaced. We're being absolutely replaced. And then, so he goes on his journey, but then it becomes even of rebellion, and thinking like the angels are going to get cast out. Like we have to protect ourselves, but then it develops more into this prodigal thing of like, we were here first. And even the faithful, like we've done everything right. We've fought and struggled. And you're just gonna let these humans in, these humans who rejected you and killed you, and like, why, and then they're gonna judge us in the end, it's got to be a tough.
And when you view it from that perspective, from the perspective of the angels, who are much older, much wiser than we are, and they can do all kinds of stuff that we can't do.
Yeah, and battle hardened, and have been fighting, losing friends in the war for souls
that most of us don't even acknowledge.
Yeah.
It's like, why are we fighting for these monkeys?
Right.
It's like, it's like, oh gosh, what's the movie? Prophecy with Christopher Walken.
Viggo Mortensen.
Yes.
Yeah, when he plays Lucifer, and
right. And Christopher Walken plays a very disgruntled Gabriel. Lousy theology, but again, the reason that we are talking with the Goss brothers today and why we encourage other Christian fiction authors, we're Brian Godawa, for one, with his Chronicles of the Nephilim, Chronicles of the Apocalypse, Chronicles of the Watchers, stuff like that. We need more of that to show from a Christian perspective these values of love and honor and self-sacrifice and truth and beauty, because we're living in a world that is rejecting the notion that those things even exist. I mean, in a postmodern world, there is no truth, there is no beauty, and that's why we see all of this ugliness and hatred around us.
Yeah, and it's disgusting, I mean, when you look at society that has rejected God, it is a carnival of grotesqueries. It's just from stem to stern. It is absolutely abhorrent, and you you can have God and still be messed up. You can be a Christian and still be disgusting, but that's like almost like a flip of a coin, depending on your psychology and where your faith is, but almost 100% that if you do not have the Lord in your life, like, it's not pretty.
Yeah.
It's really bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so
Final question for each of you fellows, because we could keep going. This 45 minutes or so has gone by very, very quickly. But in the interest of keeping these programs to a manageable length for people with busy schedules, I try to leave the audience wanting more rather than saying, boy, I wish he'd done less. I want each of you to just address this real quick. What do you hope readers take away from your writing?
You want to think about that and let me go first?
Yeah, if you're prime, let me. I'll tell you what I hope readers take away. I hope they take away the fact that it's okay to celebrate your values as a Christian.
Oh yeah.
It's okay to not have to fit in everybody's theological box, but you value the right things.
Yeah.
Because that's before the world was lit on fire, over the past few years. We had a lot of different theologies.
Yeah.
And but we all shared some very core values. Yeah. We all had for the most part, people who believed in God. I mean, we had a worldview that we could share. We knew that these things were important. So what was frustrating then is that, to get a story published out there, you had to meet a very specific set of criteria when it comes to your theology in order for publishers to get it out there. Yeah. I want people to take away the fact that you can be creative, you can write and enjoy reading all of these fantasy worlds that don't fit that specific theological criteria, but still have the values that make a story great, and you can feel safe sharing with other people.
Yeah,
that's what I really want.
Some validation, huh?
Yeah. I want parents to feel like this is something that's safe for my kid, and it's going to take them on an imaginative journey.
Yeah, and Christian validation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Replace fear with faith. And faith in the Lord, faith in the truth and sovereignty of Jesus Christ, and every decision that every character makes in the story that is detrimental is a short-sighted, fear-based decision. It is a lacking of faith every single time. Even the good guys. In fact, it turns out really bad for some of the good guys because they get caught up in this terrestrial, corporeal fear, this fear, this fleshy fear, and every time miracles happen and amazing things happen and victories are achieved, it's from, in a Christian sense, these angelic characters letting go and letting God. Like there are, and they fight. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like there's blood and sweat and tears and spit and just gnashing of teeth, and it gets pretty messy sometimes, a lot of times. But these characters, they always, much like Nick is talking about, they try to do the right thing, no matter the consequences. They try to march up to the wall with their armor bearer, it literally happens towards the end of Empyrean Falling with Michael. Like it's just like it's hopeless, but it's hopeless from a short-sighted terrestrial perspective, even though these angels are not quote unquote given unto death in the cosmology of Empyrean Falling. They can still be slain, sort of, in the sense that they can be killed in battle, and then the fallen go to hell, the faithful go to heaven, or they go to the Empyrean. But still, there is that fear that they wrestle with, like I don't want to leave my friend, I don't want to leave my brother in arms, and they deal with that a lot, and sometimes they make terrible mistakes because of it, and it costs the kingdom a lot. But every time anything good happens, man, it's because they just had faith that there's a plan and that there's one God. I'm not that God. That God is that God, you know?
Yeah.
And he's got a plan, and I'm just going to do what I think the Holy Spirit is telling me to do and let the chips fall where they may.
There you go.
That's the challenge as a Christian writer, isn't it? To try to portray God fulfilling his will through imperfect characters.
Oh yeah. Yeah, because what does God look like? You know, gonna once again, you know, make a dorky DC Talk reference, but like love is a verb, you know? And so, I know. Yeah. Everybody's like, all right, I'm gonna 1-star every one of Jonathan's books for being such a nerd. Fair. I'm gonna tell you right now, audience, fair. No, but you know, love is a verb. You have to act out those things. What are you acting out? Are you acting out your own selfish manipulation, your witchcraft, you know, trying to bend reality to your will? Or are you acting out prayerful, you know, godly love? Not this Luciferian love of like, you're okay and I'm okay, and you know, you can be your own hero, you know, you can be your own Thor. It's like, no, you are a vessel and a vassal for the Lord, you know? And when you are that, like, I mean, there's even a line in there, you know, of like going from vessel to vassal, you know, and it being a good thing. Going from an Achilles, a warrior, to a Leonidas, a soldier, someone who's willing to do the right thing no matter the consequences.
Yeah. Nick and Jonathan Goss, they are authors and co-hosts of the Goslings podcast interviews that strike down the darkness.
Yes, sir.
I will link to your author pages at Amazon, but where else should people go on the web to follow your work?
Well, they can follow my work at nickgoss.com. They can follow me on Instagram at, what is it? Nick Goss Writes. That's right. At Nick Goss Writes. Those are the two places you can find me. And of course, you can find us on our YouTube page, YouTube channel, The Goslings.
Yeah,
Right.
The Goslings, and then at Heavenly Realms Novels on Instagram. That's probably the best place to reach me. And then there's a Facebook page for the Heavenly Realms novels as well that people can always find me on. So
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. I will put all those links in the show notes. Nick, Jonathan, thanks very much for your time. Really enjoyed the conversation. We'll have to do this again.
Loved it, man.
Derek, this is such an honor.
It is an honor being on your podcast. Thank you.
Yeah, this is really huge.
It was a treat. And we can't wait to interview you again on the Goslings. I mean, if you're open to that in the future, we would absolutely love it.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Because that conversation we had about your book, The Second Coming of Saturn, was phenomenal.
Yeah. Yeah,
I've gotten several people to buy and read your book since
Well,
then.
thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I encourage it.
We would love to have you back.
Yeah, I look forward to doing it again. Again, all the links are in the notes, VFTB.net or wherever else you're consuming this podcast. So, guys, we'll talk again.
Awesome.
Sounds great.
Thanks, Derek.
All right.
See you, bud.
I have a strong feeling that we will have the brothers Goss back on this program sooner rather than later. It is really interesting to see guys who are authors of any, gender, male, female, whatever, who are writing using this kind of theology that we talk about, Sharon and me, as fodder to tell stories. Because, again, a lot of what passes for Christian fiction and has for many, many years is based on a very simplified Christian theology where there's an altar call and everybody gets saved at the end. And we know, just looking around at the world, that this is observably not how life often works. Life is messy, complicated. Some people just refuse to see. And yet there are those moments where the miraculous happens. And we ultimately will be rewarded not for two sets of rewards. If we've accepted Jesus Christ, if you have accepted Christ as your Lord and Savior, according to 1 Corinthians 15, verses 1 through 3, as Paul lays out the very simple gospel, the gospel by which we are being saved, believe that Jesus Christ, in accordance with the Scriptures, died for your sins, and in accordance with the Scriptures, rose again on the third day, because it's all about resurrection at the end. Great. Believe that, you're in. But then there will be rewards for our activities here on this earth. So let's not confuse that with earning our way into heaven. That is not a thing. God has won the victory. Very often He allows us to be tested to our limits in situations that we would prefer not to have to endure. But over and over again, as with so many of the characters in the Bible, Sharon and I talked about that this morning on our Gilbert House Fellowship Bible study. Characters like Abraham, Jacob, David, Samuel, who I had forgotten the first time we went through the scriptures. We read that the sons of Samuel behaved very much like the sons of Eli, the high priest who raised Samuel. Basically set up for themselves a little money-making scheme at Beersheba in the south, and were taking bribes and perverting justice, not ruling justly like Samuel had done. We saw the mess that was caused by David's sons fighting one with another. Solomon obviously didn't raise a very good son, and Rehoboam, at least not very wise. But over and over again, we see these imperfections in the characters that God used in the Bible to accomplish his will. And the same can happen in your life and mine if you just say yes. Like Jonathan and his armor bearer, yes, we will charge up that hill, and God's will be done. And with a gifted storyteller like my wife, like Nick Goss, like Jonathan Goss, like Brian Godawa, and many other authors. I'm not excluding others. It's just I don't have as much time to read fiction as I used to. Tolkien, Lewis, Bunyan, Pilgrim's Progress. Those characteristics, those traits, those ideals of love, self-sacrificial love, loving one another as Christ loved his church, can be told in a way to inspire and motivate people. Sharon gets emails on a fairly regular basis. People who find comfort and encouragement in the stories of spiritual warfare that she depicts in the Red Wing saga. And that's why we do it. Love to write nonfiction, getting excited about writing fiction again. And it's been too long since I've completed a manuscript. So working on that now. In fact, Sharon had a better title than the working title I was using for the next book. So I'll be stealing that. All of my good ideas come from her. Anyway, we if you're watching this the first night of release, the 24th of July, we're going to be in the Dayton, Ohio area this coming weekend. So we hope you join us there as we'll be part of the crew at the Go Therefore Conference. This will be in Brookville, Ohio, the Harvest Revival Center. Pastor Neil Peterson is hosting us there. Pastor Mike Spalding and Kathy Spalding putting this together. Some help from David Paxton, another good friend there. But we're going to see so many old friends there that we are just really looking forward to this conference. Pastor Mike Spalding, of course, Carl Gallups, Dr. Michael Lake, boy, one of the experiences, most memorable experiences we've ever had was traveling to hear the Watchman Conference back in 2017, the Great American Eclipse. And our flight out of Springfield got delayed to the point where we had 5 minutes in Denver to get from one end of our terminal to the other end to make that flight to Boise. And we just said, we're not going to make it. We're just going to go to the United Airlines desk over here and try to figure out what else we can do. Mike tried to make it. And Michael Lake's a big dude. So watching him run down the terminal, that is a sight that we will remember forever. It took us 18 hours to get to Boise that day. That was something. So anyway, love Michael Lake, David Hevner, Casper McLeod, Coach Dave Daubenmeier, Kenny C., Tom Dunn, and then some folks we will be seeing for the first time, Dr. Sherry Tenpenny, Dr. Stella Emanuel, and others. You can get complete information at the website for the conference, gothereforeconference.com. It's just $59 to register, gothereforeconference.com. If it's too late for you to make plans to travel, and of course the cost of gasoline is kind of an obstacle right now too, you can stream video. Streaming video is an option. You can get information at the website and sign up for that as well right now at gothereforeconference.com. We'll be out in California mid-September. Details on that as soon as I can point you to a website for that. L.A. Marzulli, Tim Alberino, and me, we will be speaking along with Pastor Dave Bryan. This will be a Church of Glad Tidings in Live Oak, California, September 15th, 16th. More on that as that information is released. And of course, next spring, we are looking forward to getting back to the Holy Land and seeing these battlegrounds in this long supernatural war. And we hope you'll join us for that. March 19th through 30th, our 2023 tour of Israel. Do take the optional 3-day extension in Jordan. Petra, Madaba, we see the world-famous Madaba map. That's a mosaic from the 6th century Byzantine era, a mosaic map of Israel on the floor of this church that's been preserved for 1,500 years. Absolutely amazing. And then, of course, Mount Nebo. And the more we learn about that region in history, Moses and the Israelites camping on the plains of Moab between Mount Nebo and Jericho, which you can see from the mountain, and the fact that Sodom was in all likelihood located at about 2 o'clock. If Jericho's straight ahead, Sodom was at 2 o'clock. Check out our last couple of Sci Friday episodes, interviews with Dr. Philip Sylvia about the scientific research going on at Tal El Hammam, the site of ancient Sodom. And this is where Ezekiel puts the end of the war of Gog and Magog, the valley of the travelers east of the sea. We'll be talking about all of this and preaching all along the way. It's like a rolling conference in the Holy Land. Skywatchinisrael.com, or you can go to gilberthouse.org. In the top menu bar, there's a link that says Travel With Us, gilberthouse.org, and from there, you get information and links to reserve your place on the tour. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to watch or listen wherever you are checking out this podcast. If it's at the YouTube channel, youtube.com/GilbertHouse, please give it a like, subscribe, and share that link around with your friends. Of course, we're also at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, and wherever fine podcasts are sold. Our announcer is the inimitable DC Good. And we do this because we wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.